I wanted to do one more look at the resurrection of Jesus. We talked about that last week. When you look at the evidence for the resurrection, there's debate, don't get me wrong, but there's not a lot of material to look at, in my opinion, when you compare to, say, the existence of God. That can get a little more deep. But you could probably, though, find more ways to argue against the evidence I shared with y'all last week than you can the existence of God. So I wanted to take a special lesson and let's just look at objections to what I shared with y'all last week. There's some common ones that are out there, because you may say, well, if it's so simple, then why doesn't everybody believe? Well, we'll look at that, because not everyone accepts the line of reasoning I gave you last week. So we made a case for the resurrection, and here's the main lines of reasoning that we looked at. How can we prove the resurrection of Jesus? Well, to be truthful, you can't prove that. No more than in the same way that you can't prove, look, here's God. We can't go back in time and revisit and look for ourselves to see Jesus. That's what I mean, we can't prove that. We can't go there and be an eyewitness ourselves. You can't have a lab environment where you recreate that event. So once again, we're left to look at indirect and direct evidence. So that's how we made our case. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about that because you need to understand a little bit of both of those to look at the resurrection of Jesus. So we looked at the Old Testament, it predicts it. The New Testament testified to the resurrection. Then there's proven historical facts that have to be dealt with. And then we looked at evidence of the early disciples' changed lives. So just to hit the highlights real quick and we'll move on. The Old Testament predicted it. Well, why was that important? Because once the resurrection was preached by the disciples, when you read your New Testament, you'll find phrases such as so per the Scriptures, or the Scriptures say, or according to the Scriptures. What they were doing is they were looking back in the Old Testament, Isaiah 53 for an example, some of the Psalms, and they were seeing, oh, that's what they meant. They weren't talking about themselves in their day. They were looking forward to the Messiah who would come, die, and rise again. Meaning this, some people will say, well, the resurrection of Jesus is a new invention of his followers. Not necessarily. They could look back in the Old Testament and find where it was prophesied. The New Testament testifies to it. Well, we looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and you have in that chapter, Paul gives a summary case for the resurrection. And if you remember that chapter, he lists eyewitnesses by name, some of them. Peter, James, himself. He even called out that Jesus appeared to hundreds of disciples at one time on a mountainside. Then there are key facts. Now this is where the rubber sort of meets the road that we talked about last week. This is my third bullet. There are key historical facts that have to be dealt with. You have to figure out an answer to them, and it's how we make our case to say, look, the answer is the resurrection of Jesus. And I'll hit the highlights of those again for a moment. But the last one then, think about the changed lives of the disciples. They had radically changed lives. I want to hit the highlights of what we said again about the historical facts, because tonight we're going to talk about these again, because people will come to different conclusions than the conclusion I come to. The conclusion I come to is the answer to these facts is Jesus rose from the grave, as they said. But let's look at those. Jesus was a real person from history who was literally killed by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Again, these are facts established outside of your Bible. This is stuff recorded down in history outside of the Bible. And I shared with you quotes last week from historians of their day saying, yes, the man really lived, and yes, he was killed by a governor named Pilate by order of crucifixion. These are facts. In fact, one non-Christian historian said, it is a fact beyond doubt, beyond all doubt, that Jesus of Nazareth lived and died by crucifixion. So if someone says, well, you don't even know that the man lived. Well, if you believe that, you're actually denying human history, because that is such an established fact. No scholar even questions that. So we're past that. We're past talking about, did the man even exist? Let's not even go there. That's a proven fact of history. The next proven fact of history is he was buried after he was crucified in the tomb of a known public figure named Joseph of Arimathea. Once again, this is an established historical fact. that people largely do not deny. The third one is his tomb was found to be empty 3 days later. Now notice the facts don't say he rose again from the dead. That's the conclusion we make. But the facts are that have to be dealt with so far these three. And the next one, his disciples, his early followers, claimed they physically saw him alive after they had seen him be killed. And the final point to look at, Jesus' early followers experienced radically changed lives because of this claim, the claim being that they saw Jesus after his death. This is what we're saying, okay? If you are just looking at human history, you look at the records that are there from their day, you look at these facts, you have to find an answer to why these facts are facts. What I mean is you have to come up with a conclusion to these points. Why are these points a reality of human history, and what is their answer? Meaning, what's the answer to the empty tomb? Because it is a proven fact that the tomb was found empty. You may not believe he rose from the dead, but the point I'm trying to stress to you, you're going to have to come up with your answer then for how the tomb was empty. And we're going to look at these other answers people say. Did they steal the body and stuff like that? But this is our case, that the Old Testament prophesied it, the New Testament testified to it. The disciples had radically changed lives, but then there's historical facts that people don't deny. Yes, these are facts of history. Again, they deny the spiritual stuff about it, the mystical, well, he rose from the dead. So you have to come up with how can you explain that we know that he died, we know where he was buried, we also know the tomb was found empty, we also know that his disciples claimed they say they saw him. Now the key word is claimed. People won't acknowledge that they did see him, but they do acknowledge, and I shared y'all quotes last week from some non-Christian historians. One even said something to the effect of, it is a known fact that they saw something. They just deny that they saw the risen Lord. But I want to stress to you that it's interesting to me that even historians who are non-Christian look at the evidence and they also admit they saw something. The proof is because we have record of how radically it changed the course of their lives to the point they were willing to die for the message that they saw him. And so they look back and say they saw something. We just don't accept that it was the miracle they say it was, but we know that something happened. Well, again, this all is giving us credibility to say, well, why is it such a stretch then for you to actually just believe their message? And their message was they physically saw Jesus alive after he had been killed. So if the man was really killed, he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, his tomb was found empty, they could not produce his body and prove the disciples wrong. Again, we stressed that last week. If this was a sham, this would have been one of the most easy things to disprove. Just show me the body. But I remember it was under guard, right? But they couldn't do that. My argument is they did not do that because they could not do that. There was no body to be found. His followers went to their deaths or exiled for preaching this message of the resurrection. Again, we're saying, well, what makes the most sense? That Jesus literally rose from the dead as they said. Okay? Now, but again, you could make some objections. So this is what we'll look at this evening. Not everyone agrees with our conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead. I mean, it's obvious, right? Not everybody's Christian. Not everybody believes in Jesus. So why do people have trouble with this? The Bible, again, gives us our answer. This is not a head problem, it's a heart problem. The Bible says that we are naturally inclined to sin. We naturally lean away from God, not lean into God. We run away from holy matters. We have to sort of be pulled to God by God himself. So it's a spiritual issue. It's not, I want to stress that to you guys. Don't let anyone back you in a corner for, well, you have no proof for being a Christian. I have all the proof I need. It's just you're not going to want to hear it. That's the real issue. I can talk to you about existence of God. I can talk to you about how I know the Bible is a validated source from history and it's true. I can talk to you about our case for the resurrection, but the question becomes, if it were proven to you that this stuff is true, would you even believe it in the first place? I would argue some people, if they're honest, would say, well, I really don't want that stuff to be true. Of course you don't. I don't want to be told how to live my life, and you don't either. But if this stuff is true, then all of a sudden we're in a problem. We're sinners doomed to eternity of judgment by God, and we need His grace and forgiveness. So again, I just want to stress to you that if it's so easy, why don't everyone believe? They don't want to believe. They may not say it that way, but that in my mind is really how it works. So here's an objection. I'm going to give you some common ones. Most of my material and what shaped me and helped me is what I'm giving to you. So I'm giving you the sources that I go to. When I was in college, this is what troubled me was, well, you can't prove the resurrection. And these guys helped me see, here's some facts that you have to deal with. And some of my professors would bring up a couple of these objections, or it's sometimes maybe you could even think of your own objection to this stuff. But let's look at some. Some may say, well, he faked his own death. It's also called the swoon theory, meaning he fainted. So not necessarily that you could say he faked his death, but what they more so mean is he fainted, he didn't really die. But then he escaped out of the tomb. He sort of pulled a Houdini. So again, the theory is, well, the reason the tomb's empty is he somehow escaped because he was never killed in the first place. But let's think about that for just a moment, and you can just think logically and reason through this. Does this make any sense? It doesn't. First of all, it was trained Roman torturers that were the crucifiers of Jesus. That was their professional job, was to beat you to the point of death so that they could hang you on a cross and watch you die. Crucifixion was not nice. See, even the death penalty today, you're killing someone, but it's done in a very, humane is not the right word, you're killing someone, but it's done in a very peaceable manner. I mean, they just fall asleep and die. The lethal injection. They just lay on a bed, an injection, and they're dead. That was not crucifixion. Crucifixion didn't just kill you, it was meant to humiliate you. You see the images of the pictures of the cross and they're up on high hills. That's not technically accurate. The crosses were low. They were meant for you to walk by and spit on them people and make fun of them. Like they were, if there was a cross here, their feet might just be right by your head. They weren't high up, they were right here. And they were on public roads, like night lights. Because they were meant to humiliate you. They were meant for you to walk by and look at this moron and look at this idiot, and you could spit on him, you could slap him. That's what crucifixion was. So they were beaten to a pulp, meant to hang there, to be humiliated, and they would hang there and die for hours and hours on end. So it doesn't make any sense that he didn't really die, because that was these guys' job, was to make sure they were successful at killing people. If they did not do that right, the Roman soldier, the torturers, they themselves would be killed as their punishment. So you have every incentive to make sure you actually kill the people. Because if they don't die and it's botched, then you're dead. You're going to take their place probably. The other thing is, if you remember the story, Jesus' legs were not broken like the two beside him, which also fulfilled prophecy, by the way. What happened when they went to Jesus? Do you remember what they did to him? They pierced the side, and what does it say happened? Anyone remember? Like what poured out? The blood and water mixed together. Now, some medical people have actually examined that and verified that's a legit thing. Because when a person dies, it's a bodily thing. I don't know my terms. I'm not a medical guy. But I've read the sort of layman's version of this, that really happens. The sac around the heart will fill with liquid. So that the Romans knew that too. They knew what they were doing. They were professionals at this. So to verify that he was dead, they stabbed and pierced under the ribs into that sac. And they know their job. They know, hey, if we pierce the sac around the heart and water comes out with the blood, he's dead. And that's what happened. So they know he's dead. There was no mistake. My other point would be this. Let's say he didn't really die. He passed out and he's in a coma for 3 days. Does it make any sense to you that after all he went through, the beatings, hanging there for hours, stabbed, by the way, does that make any sense that he would muster up the strength after a 3-day coma to break out of there? Because not only does he have to muster up the strength to walk, crawl, or something, How's he getting out of there? There's a massive door over the tomb. Let's say he can move the door somehow. How's he getting past the guards? Remember, there's guards posted there. Someone's going to see him, I would think. He's been savagely beaten, weak, and unconscious for 3 days. How could he have moved the tomb door? How could he have gotten past the guards? And here's another point to consider about this. Let's say, again, for argument's sake, that happened. He didn't really die. He fainted. He mustered up the strength after 3 days to break out of the tomb. Let's say he found a little back door somehow, so he got past the guards and all that. Well, the story goes that he appeared to his disciples, right? But the stories we have are he appeared to them. At times they didn't recognize him at first because he appeared so glorious. Now, think about this in my last point I have here. If this story were true, he would not have appeared glorious to his disciples at all. How would he have appeared to them? He would have appeared like a survivor of a brutal beating, not a victorious Messiah. He would have appeared like a survivor. I mean, they would have seen him like, oh my goodness, we got to take care of Jesus here. He's barely hanging on to his life. He would have been bruised and bloody and pierced, right? But that's not the record we have. He appeared victorious. He appeared as, I've done this. I've actually accomplished salvation. So again, it doesn't make any sense. In fact, William Lane Craig, one of the videos I shared, he outright says this theory is so weak that there is no New Testament historian that actually tries to defend that theory today. Now, when he means New Testament historian, he doesn't mean Christians. He means scholars that study the New Testament as a piece of literature, not as the Word of God. So he even says this theory is so weak, you're not going to find a credible scholar that tries to defend that. They know it's bogus. Another theory is, well, the tomb was empty because they were mistaken on... There's two versions of this. Some will say they went to the wrong tomb. But the more popular view is they moved Jesus' body. So this says that they buried Jesus' body in Joseph's tomb temporarily. And then later they moved his body to a common criminal's graveyard. That's how it's usually stated. Like, well, of course the tomb's empty. They had already moved the body and buried him where the other criminal's graveyard was. Okay, so the disciples mistakenly concluded he had risen from the dead. But here's some problems with this. Jewish law would actually have prohibited that from happening. Jewish law said that if you took a corpse down after crucifixion for burial, it could only be moved under one circumstance. If an immediate family member wanted to take custody of the body, you could do that. But you couldn't just move a corpse. Once it was buried, it had to stay buried. It was against their law. You couldn't say, well, we changed our mind, let's move him from here to here. Well, a close family member would have had to come and said, we're going to bury him in our own place. So no one did that. No one claimed the body of Jesus besides Joseph of Arimathea. The disciples are in hiding behind locked doors. They're not coming to ask for the body. None of his family are. They didn't believe in him. Remember, James, it says, didn't believe in him. His family didn't. So it would have actually been against the law for them to have said, let's move his body to a common criminal's graveyard. In fact, the criminal graveyard that we know on record was right near the crucifixion site. That is what they did. They would crucify a criminal, and if he had no family wanting the body, they went to a commoner's graveyard. Like it was just here to here. Simple process. But that's what they would have done with Jesus. But remember, Joseph of Arimathea asked for his body because he respected him enough to not want him to be buried like a common thug. That's why he put him in his tomb. So again, all that means it's against the law that they would have went to Joseph's tomb and moved him back. That wouldn't have happened. So, but think of it logically this way. Let's say again that happened for argument's sake. The disciples foolishly assumed the tomb is empty, therefore he rose again. Okay, let's say that they're wrong, they're mistaken. Again, it would have been too easy to prove them wrong. So the disciples go out and start preaching, hey, he rose again, the tomb's empty. Well, all anyone had to do is say, no, slow down. We just moved his body, here he is. But that didn't happen. Again, it's too easy to disprove. William Lane Craig once again says that no scholar that he's aware of defends that view either. It has too many holes. Well, some say, well, they were hallucinating. What they mean hallucinating is they claim they saw him. Well, what's the explanation for that? They'll say, well, they were dreaming, they had a vision, but they didn't literally see Jesus after he had risen from the dead. They imagined, dreamed, or hallucinated. But here's some issues with this. You mean to tell me then that over 500 people had the same hallucination? So just think about this. How likely do you think it would be that some 500 people have the same dream, vision, or hallucination? I mean, seriously, do you think that that's really possible? I don't. That seems to me to be a highly improbable event. So again, that's what's at stake here. You want to say they hallucinated? Okay, so tell me another event where you've heard of 500 people having the same dream, the same vision, the same hallucination. That does not make sense. Not only over 500 people, but in different locations. So let's say you had 500 people say, we all saw the risen Lord, and they were all at the same concert in the same arena. Well, yeah, you could argue, look, they pumped some kind of LSD through the vents or something, and you all had the same experience. But that's not what happened here. We're talking 500 people in different locations. So now it gets more complicated to try to claim this. It's adding it to be more highly unlikely that that's possible because it's too many people in too many places having the same dream or the same vision. Now, here's something interesting. Not only did this many people in this many places have the same vision, it would be one thing if only Christians had that vision. But there's two people that were not Christians that also claimed they had that same vision. But the Apostle Paul, what was he on the road to go do when he claims he had this same vision or hallucination? He claimed he was a bounty hunter. He was out to get Christians and drag them out of their homes. So what I'm saying is at the time he claims he had this vision, he wasn't a Christian. What skin in the game did he have to try to say he had this vision? He lost his profession. He lost his career over this vision. He lost his status. The half-brother of Jesus, James, was not a believer. Yet he claims, I saw him. I believe in him now. Became the pastor of the church at Jerusalem. What skin in the game did he have to believe this? He didn't get any wealth or status. So you have both Christians and non-Christians claiming they have the same vision. To me, once again, it's adding more layers to say that doesn't make any sense, that would happen. Now, William Lane Craig said this, and I like a point he made. A vision of Jesus, let's assume that it was just a vision. It wasn't the real physical body of Jesus there, that the disciples saw. All that would have meant to the disciples was that he made it to the afterlife. So William Lane Craig points out, in their first century day, Jewish theology was that there would be a resurrection. But they believed in a resurrection at the end of the world, the end of the age, for the righteous. So they didn't really have a concept of a personal resurrection of the Messiah. So William Lane Craig points out, visions of dead people, yes, those were reported in ancient religions. But visions of dead people were thought to be, that didn't mean that they resurrected from the dead. That meant that they had passed on into the afterlife. And that their ghost form, their spirit form, had come back to sort of report to you, hey, I'm in the afterlife. And then they give a message. It gets a little complicated. Does that kind of make sense? So, because they claimed they saw Jesus, literally, physically. Let's assume they're hallucinating. Well, William Lane Craig makes a good point to say, if they were hallucinating, all that would have meant is he made it to heaven to be back with the Father, and his spirit form came to tell them, I've made it. But there's the problem with that. The problem is they go around preaching in the book of Acts, we saw him after death. We saw him rise again. Why weren't they preaching, hey, believe in Jesus because he taught a lot of good things and did miracles, and oh, by the way, he died and went to be with the Father, but he came back and told us through his Spirit, go do this stuff. That's not what they said. They said that they physically saw him again. So there's a big difference. This theory, again, I want to point out, if someone says to you, well, they were hallucinating, I would challenge them back with a question like this. If you assume they're hallucinating, so be it. That still does not address the issue of the empty tomb. Do you get what I'm saying? This theory doesn't even touch on the empty tomb. The first two we looked at try to explain the empty tomb. You know, they stole the body or misplaced it. He wasn't really dead and he escaped out. But this theory goes straight to the disciples claiming they saw him. So I would just challenge back, hey, before we talk about that, why aren't you dealing with the empty tomb? Because you have to deal with that. That's a historical fact. You have to try to explain. This theory doesn't even touch on that. So to me, it's, again, just a bogus theory.
Thank you for watching. We hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Join us next time as we will examine further objections to the resurrection.